Welcome back to Self Love Ignited. My name is Katie Allen. Today, I have a very special interview for you. I'm chatting with Kyira Wackett. Now, Kyira came on to share her personal story of self love, what she describes as self love. And a lot of hers has to do with overcoming childhood trauma, shame, the stories within that, challenging relationships, an eating disorder. And, she talks about all of these different aspects of her own story. And there's so much that's really relatable in there. Kyira is a licensed mental health therapist who specializes in shame and anxiety. She's the owner of Adversity Rising, a company who equips people with the confidence and skills to write their own stories. She does one-on-one work. She does corporate wellness packages. She has an incredible signature program called That Life AR. It's an online self-paced program. And Kyira's really focused on community, bringing people together and giving you the tools so that you can step up, so that you can create a life in which you can really thrive. This interview was incredibly powerful. She has so much wisdom. I'm really looking forward to sharing this with you. So without further ado, here's Kyira. My name is Katie Allen, and this is Self Love Ignited. Let's get to it. Welcome back to Self Love Ignited. Today on the podcast, I'm interviewing Kyira Wackett. Kyira, I'm so happy that we are finally having this conversation. We first connected a while ago. It is about time that we sat down together. So welcome. Why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself to everybody?
Well, I am equally as excited to be here. I agree with you. I've been looking forward to our conversation since our kind of initial discussion. So I'm super pumped to be here. I would say today, I feel like the things that are really kind of seem to be my primary sense of self, or like how I'm identifying, is I am a therapist. I'm a licensed mental health therapist. I work with people on shame and anxiety mostly. I think shame is really the undercurrent to everything I do. I am a mom. She's going to be 3 in less than a month, and she is super excited about her birthday party. She told me this morning that we need to take the Max, which is our kind of train system in Portland, Oregon. We need to take the Max to her birthday party because she's going to be 3. So she's old enough to do that now. So full out, like learning to love toddler mom life and all the in between, being a therapist who, no matter how great you are at your job, you can't outrun toddler tantrums and their behavior things. I'm married. My husband and I, Jordan, have lived in Portland for about 5 years, and we just started house hunting. So I would say I'm like this person now. I'm a therapist, I'm a mom, I'm a partner, I'm a friend, all the different roles. But I think me as a person right now, I'm sort of experiencing a lot of invitations to push myself professionally in my business, but personally in terms of I've survived and gone through a lot of trauma, and I would say thrived through a lot of trauma. And I'm now doing these like really big life changes that I spent most of my life telling myself I would never have. I would never be able to buy a house. I would never have kids. I would never have a stable marriage, stable, healthy relationship where we actually talk and like each other. And so that is, I think, a thing I'm centering on right now about kind of who I am and how I'm showing up in the world.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And we're going to get into your story because there's obviously a lot that's led you to this place, right? Like we don't just magically arrive in these places where we feel centered. There's a lot of steps to
Right.
get us here, right? So I want to invite you to sort of take us back to the beginning, right? So this podcast is all about self-love and telling the stories of people like you who have come from a place of not liking themselves, not loving themselves, not believing in themselves, and telling the story of that transformation, the steps that you took, how you got to where you are today. So take us back to the beginning. Where did your challenges with yourself begin?
I think the biggest thing when I think about that is, so now as a therapist and having studied shame, I can recognize like, oh, you've been doing this since you were a baby and infancy, blah, blah, blah. But we're not conscious of that in those moments. I remember, maybe it was middle school, elementary school, must have been elementary school, like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. I was still living with my mom at the time, which I'll get to in a second. But I remember starting to get a feel for I, as a person, am really good at performing. I, as a person, I think now I know the words that I'm a very empathic person, but empathy we know can really be a struggle because then we can carry the weight and responsibility of being something for so many other people. And so I think probably even before this age, but I really started to recognize it around like 10 years old. I was really good at knowing who was in the room and then performing to be the person that they needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I always seem to make people feel good, feel heard, feel seen. I started to, around when I turned 10, my life with my mom kind of changed. So my mom was a single mom. I'm an only child. And she lived with an undiagnosed at the time mental health disorder. And she had had 3 miscarriages and a stillborn before having me and had been told, you're never going to have a successful pregnancy. Kind of, if anyone's not familiar with bipolar disorder, there's some ways that the brain functions that look a little bit different. And so you don't really understand risk in the same way. You're a bit more impulsive. There's sort of a hypersexuality. Your spending patterns look different. The way you engage in the world just looks a little different. And so my mom kind of having this news of she wasn't going to be able to have a kid, which is all she ever wanted. So the trauma of that mixed with her brain not yet having any sort of medicinal or therapeutic supports because nobody knew what she was living with at the time, kind of mixed her around being, I would say, sexually pretty open and free because there was nothing she could lose. She wasn't going to be able to have a kid. She wasn't looking for a partner. She didn't think about, risks, things like that. And then she had me and her whole life changed. And looking back on it, her whole life changed in a way where she made me her whole life. She
Mm-hmm.
was amazing, wonderful, powerful, but I was her life and it became my job to make her be okay, but also she only wanted to be around me. So I think I say this to say I think my experiences from infancy really were about that. Like I was her whole life and I carried this responsibility, I think subconsciously, to be something for her to make her feel okay.
Mm-hmm.
She ended up relapsing when I was 10 and was falling back into some drug issues that she had had prior to getting pregnant with me. And that sort of offset I moved in with a bunch of different family members. My mom was in and out of jail. She was homeless. She was using sort of higher end drugs, or not higher end, but like riskier drugs like cocaine and substances like that. She
Mm-hmm.
was in prison for a period of time. And I think that major life change. Suddenly, my mom and I was her whole world. Suddenly, I wasn't anymore. She was gone. And then mixed with this skill of it feels like my job is to be something for everybody else because I can make people feel good. And that's really good. All those things I think came to a head in that sort of elementary, middle school time in a way where I didn't even consider what it was like to feel okay in yourself. I just was striving to feel secure enough that I didn't feel like I was free falling without anybody. And so I kind of unraveled any sense of self love to just dive deeper into that role of be whatever you can. So people love you. They want to be around you. And be the good kid, because now you're the kid without the parents, you're the kid without this. And so I think that was probably the starting point that dominoed into many years of feeling like I kept losing check marks in the column that said that I was supposed to be here and that I was worthy of being here in the same way.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And I mean that time of life, like elementary school, middle school, like 9, 10 years old, like that's challenging for all kids, right? It's like you're
Right.
approaching puberty, your body starts changing, hormones are changing. Like that's always going to be a challenging time, I think. But when you have
Mm-hmm.
massive life changes like you described, like that's monumental. And it's interesting, even though my childhood experience is quite different with my parents, I can see a lot of the same like behaviors in myself mirrored in you as you're speaking. I'm like, yep,
Mm-hmm.
sounds familiar. Like I think a lot of us have taken on that role in some way of like making other, when we're empathic, we know what other people need so we can make them feel good. And we can, I
Mm-hmm.
describe myself as the chameleon, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
can
Oh, I used to
change.
call myself that all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you can change depending on like who's in front of you and what they need and how they respond to you. And it just
Mm-hmm.
becomes natural and you don't even think about it. And at the time you don't
Yeah.
recognize it as a problem. It is a skill, right? You're like, look at what I can
Mm-hmm.
do. It seems like a great thing, but in that there's a lot of self abandonment, I think, or there can be a lot of self abandonment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I remember when I was in 5th grade and I had moved in with my aunt and uncle and with my mom. And again, I think probably a product of her bipolar disorder and maybe some things that I'm never fully going to know and understand. We moved a lot. So even before I moved in with family, I was in a new school every other year, maybe every 2 years. So I never had a consistent group of friends. I was never in the same home. Things were changing all the time. And so you get really good at that. And so I remember when I moved in with my family, I called myself a chameleon. And I was talking to my grandma at one point. And she's like, "Are you nervous about the new school?" And I was like, "I've been going to new schools my whole life. Like, I know how to do this game." But it was like this realization looking back on it where I think I also developed a defense of, particularly after my mom left, but I think also because you have new friends all the time, you never really feel settled, where it was also easier to lean into the empathic side to take care of everybody else. And so, subconsciously, when a parent leaves, whether it's they're emotionally unavailable or physically gone or some mixture of both, there's this undercurrent feeling of like, well, why am I not good enough for you to be here? And then we see that in other relationships mirrored as we get older, romantic relationships, friendships, things like that. But it's that notion of the people that were supposed to stay left. The security I'm supposed to have isn't here. My dad's not here, my mom's not here. I moved in with my family, then eventually I moved in with my grandma. My aunt had her own mental health struggles and ended up kind of like randomly kicking me out one morning and sent me over to my grandma's house. And so it's like, well, the people that are supposed to be there don't stay, so why would anybody else? So it also was easier to just constantly live as the chameleon, because then when they left, they weren't leaving me, they were leaving the performance. So I think it was both. It was, I'm good at it, it feels good to be wanted, but also when you leave, you never really knew me anyways, so then I'll be okay on that side. And
Yeah.
both sides of that kind of reinforce in your brain, you as who you are doesn't deserve to be in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, yes. So Kyira, how did this how did this follow you? Right. So this was you when you were like 9,
Mm.
10 years old. What did this look like? How did this evolve through your teenage years and into adulthood?
I think that, again, similar to what everybody goes through, whether they have childhood trauma or not, we all kind of go through a period of middle school, high school where we're trying on different conformities, different identities, where we're trying to fit into different places to see what fits. And many of us have done something where, for me, it was wearing this stupid Hollister polo that everybody wore. And I just wanted to look like other kids. And so I would spend all the money that I'd make at the ice cream shop, at the restaurant that I worked at, and I'd buy these dumb clothes that didn't fit me right. I didn't like them. They were really cheap, but super expensive. And so you dress the certain part, you listen to the music other people do, you do the things that you want. I think I very much was in that realm for a period of time. And again, it's hard to know how much of that was just normal growing up and how much of that was a result of my own stories. I i got really, I think, emotionally detached from my life for a really long period of time. And so I could talk about the trauma that would happen, like my mom going to prison, my mom experiencing suicidality, my grandma experiencing suicidality and sort of becoming her parent as well in many ways. I would talk about it as if I was talking about like 2 + 2 is 4. And so there was this, I think, distancing in my life that happened. So I wasn't really connecting to my full self anymore. And I was trying on all these parts to be liked. When I was in high school, I was always the one that people gravitated to. And I was also the straight A student, in the top 10. I was the captain of the volleyball team, the head of National Honor Society. So I had this certain degree, again, of protection because everybody treated me a certain way from having these quote unquote check marks of success. But I also never really felt like, I remember feeling like I don't look the same as my friends. My body carried more weight than some of my friends did. So I was always a bit unkind to my body. I was always afraid. It wasn't that I needed to be better than everybody because I felt like I was better, but I always felt like, well, if I'm not the smartest one in the room, why would they stick around me?
Yeah.
So I started to notice that sort of like, I have to be better. I have to have everything. To People need to be almost jealous of me, but that's not the word that I wanted. Like, I wanted them to admire me in a way that then I was deserving of being in the same room of all these other people. And I think it also, I was just striving for something that felt normal. Look, I really only recently started to realize this as I've been thinking about friendships and relationships during that time. I started dating somebody in high school, dated them all through college. Lovely human, but I was never in love with them. But I would spend every day trying to convince myself I was, because he represented stability. He had two parents who loved him, who were consistently there. Like, I was a part of the family. They had all the same friends that they went to in high school, were still their friends in their 40s and 50s. Like, I just wanted security. I wanted people that didn't leave. So I think I was also doing that. And then slowly kind of beating myself up still on the ways that I wasn't matching up. I ended up developing an eating disorder in college, honestly, kind of by accident. I now specialize in eating disorders as a therapist, and like it just sort of developed without me knowing it. But again, now looking back on it, I can see how it would have gotten its legs. I had a lot of friendships where I was just performing. I chased this dream that everybody else had, that I would be a doctor, all through undergrad, 3 times through the MCATs, thousands of dollars of med school applications, all not wanting to do any of it. But again, just feeling like if I don't do it, people will think it's because I can't. And if they think I can't do something, I won't be a part of this anymore. I have to be the person people look at as having it all together, doing it all, having it all. And that was the exhausting point. That's what I eventually burnt out on.
Yeah, that sounds exhausting. I mean, anytime we
Mm-hmm.
are in any level of performance or striving, it takes extra energy, right? Because you can never just
Mm-hmm.
be. There's no like relaxing into yourself, into your body, into your relationships. There's no like safety in that. You're fight or flight all the time. You're always on.
Right.
Like
Right.
that's gonna burn you out. And especially doing that for years and years and
Yeah.
years. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're scanning the environment for threats, assuming that there's one lurking at every corner, because again, everything could be a threat because you are assuming you at your core are unworthy of love. You've internalized that belief so fully
Yeah.
that your job isn't to make yourself worthy of love. Your job becomes hiding your unworthiness
Yeah.
through the performance. And so the threat is the cracks in the system, the peeking behind the curtain, all these things that you just do whatever you can to make sure nobody sees it.
Yeah. Yeah. So going from that place of applying to med school, doing the things that you were, quote unquote, supposed to be doing, and now here you are
Mm-hmm.
today, like you said at the beginning, you are in a happy, balanced, stable relationship. You are a mom and you never thought that was going to
Mm-hmm.
happen. You have this amazing career that's being built. You're looking at homes, like all of these things that you never thought you would have.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get from being that girl in college who was trying to hide how unworthy you were behind the performance to today? Because that's a big gap. There's a lot that would have
Yeah.
happened in there.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely still think I'm early in my years of kind of shame recovery and resilience building, because there's still pieces of that person here. Pieces of, even we were with our realtor the other day, and I was like, is he going to be annoyed because we've looked at too many houses? And I don't want him to be upset. I don't want him to think that we're taking advantage of his time. And my husband's like, you have every right to take as much time as you want to find the right house that you want to move into. That's like, well, tell me what the fear is for you. What's the threat to you in this moment?
Mm-hmm.
So I still do it all the time. I mean, I think a few weeks ago, I built an entire case that I was the world's worst mom on the planet. And anybody that has, little ones in their life probably does this daily in some iteration, but I think I'm still there. The thing I think that has changed was kind of twofold. So I met my husband right after I graduated college. So I was 22 at the time. And he sort of represented a very different, what I know now is a healthy relationship, but it was just different at the time. And I was very intrigued by it, where he would ask a question, and when I would deflect back to him, which is something I'm sure you've got good at that too. Like, again, that's the chameleon piece. I know how to keep it all about you and make you talk about yourself and you feel good, you feel built up. He would always come back to, I want to know you. And he would kind of push to see these things. And I think it just sort of opened the door to the idea that maybe what I'm thinking and feeling, because I knew I was miserable. By the time I graduated college, I was very deep in eating disorder behaviors, a constant state of self-loathing. People would say things all the time and I thrived on it. It was like just like a hit of a drug where they would say, I don't know how you do it. I wish I could look like you. I wish I could do the things you do. I wish I could. You have everything together. And again, that was the performance. That's what I needed them to come to the play, watch the performance, and go away taking with them was she's got it all together.
Yeah.
And so I think it was the first time where somebody came in not only not buying it, but like wasn't interested in somebody that had it all together. And so it started to kind of like bring to the surface what I was already thinking and feeling, which is, gosh, this sucks. I don't like this. I
Yeah.
feel crappy all the time. And I had a lot of really complex parts of my relationship with my mom, with my grandma, who kind of became a mom to me when I moved in with her in seventh grade and onwards, where he would start calling things out and saying things that was like, that's not, now it's not like what I do as a therapist for somebody, kind of pointing something out of like, oh, that sounds kind of abusive. That sounds not okay. You start to notice these things. And then I think it kind of opened up the door to exploring a few different pieces in general. And long story short, I think I started to take those invitations and kind of sometimes be pushed into those invitations to realize whatever I was doing, what was clear to me is I was going to die if I kept doing it, particularly from like an eating
Mm.
disorder and actually dying, but
Yep.
also just sort of become a shell of yourself of this can't pan out. I can't get anywhere with this. I'm never going to be able to. I mean, I would spend every waking moment when something good would happen planning for how I was going to screw it up.
Yeah.
And believing, again, I ended up admitting I didn't want to go to medical school. I ended up kind of like having all these hard points happening. And I think it was just starting to see maybe from external, and that's the crappy part is like for many of us, it comes from getting some of that external reinforcement because we don't yet have the solid foundation to do it internally. Obviously, long term, the work has to become internal.
Yeah.
But I think I started to find some courage through the external support to try on what it was like to be me instead of playing a part. And it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't going as poorly as I thought.
Right.
I told somebody at one point I had an eating disorder and they said, oh, and then we went back to having beers and chatting and like as if nothing about my worth had changed. And I was like, wait a minute, I've spent my whole life thinking if you find out this about me or this about me, there's a problem.
Yeah.
And then I started doing the work. I started saying, okay, I have no guarantee that this is going to work out if I try something different.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know at, at this point, I think I had done some, I don't remember exactly, but I wasn't in graduate school yet, but I had known enough about sort of the eating disorder world to know how deadly that was. I knew how terrible it was. I knew that what I was doing sucked, like in terms of how I felt. And so my switch in my brain was I've spent my whole life being afraid to try something different, but this sucks too.
Yeah.
So what if I'm wrong? Like what if it could be a little bit better? What if like people love themselves? Like, okay, I don't know if I could get there, but maybe I could get to a point where I wasn't constantly afraid of losing everything. Like maybe I could get to a point where I could like not perform for everybody. And I think that was really the shifting point. And then it's just been years of continually pushing and then doing the hard work, which is separating from the people and the past experiences that contribute to the shame narrative that said you're not worthy, you're not
Mm-hmm.
lovable. And that was really, really hard. The forgiveness, the untethering, the boundary setting. And that's why I think it's an iterative thing. Like I'm still not good at it. I still have lots of pain with my mom that we're working through of how do you set boundaries with somebody that you've had such an enmeshed relationship with where you felt like your whole job was to take care of them. But the more I create space to try out not being the person that has to fix everything for somebody, and then I realize even if I'm not the person they come to all the time, I feel better. That was worth it to me.
Yeah.
I could, like I could spend the rest of my life hating my body. Obviously, no matter what, there will be some days I do, but man, I'm spending an awful lot of time not only hating my body mentally, but like abusing my body physically in this disorder. And I don't want that. And then you just start allowing, I think, the possibility that, again, like I said, maybe it won't be better, but it might be different enough that it's not this shitty is how it feels
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like a lot of the things that I talk about, I've had so many people obviously ask me about self-love and relationships and where do you start? And quite often the thing that I say for a lot of people is curiosity. It's asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
Asking questions of yourself, of what you want, of what feels good, of what doesn't feel good. Just getting curious about how your experience could be different. Because I think inherently, just
Mm-hmm.
like you've said, inherently, when we start asking questions of like, maybe I can't love myself, but maybe I can not hate myself. Maybe there's a way for me to move from this place into, like that gives us possibilities. That gives us
Mm-hmm.
hope, I think. I think that's like
Yeah.
this, that can be the spark of something.
Well, I think even for when I started after meeting Jordan, and he would say this kind thing that had nothing to do with, those external things, how I looked, my accolades, like it was just something about me as a person. And you immediately dismiss it. Even things like somebody telling you that you're beautiful when you've spent your whole life telling yourself that you're not. So you immediately write your shame story over whatever anybody else says, which again puts you on the hook feeling like you know everything, which you don't. That's your ego trying to assume you know everything, but
Mm-hmm.
then also that you can control everything. And so I think that was the other thing of realizing I I don't have the evidence to say that he's lying to me. It feels safer to believe that when he or when anybody else says something kind to me, or when something works out for me, it's easier to believe that, imposter syndrome, or they're lying, they're manipulating, they're looking for something. But I don't actually have the evidence to keep believing in that. So then you start to think about, well, what's the story? How did I get here? Why is it that I'm immediately assuming he's lying to me when there's nothing to say that he's a liar or that he's a person that would do that? And I think that's the part that started to be the curiosity place, because then you look at, well, this is a story I came in with. People couldn't love me. People couldn't find me beautiful. People couldn't want to stick around. People wouldn't choose me if I wasn't taking care of them. I mean, the first 5 years of our relationship, he was in medical school when this finally, or maybe just getting into medical school. And I would still make him lunches every day to pack. He's like, I can do that myself. I don't need you. I would like do everything for him. And you just start to say, maybe he's not wrong. And I think one of the scariest parts, again, now what I've learned in my role as a therapist, is it is so much safer to assume that we have all the control, and yet we can control nothing. Like everything bad is going to happen. I can't actually control it. The world is terrible. Everyone's going to hate me, but I'm going to try to micromanage and control everything to make it feel like I can. And we get caught in this tension point all the time. And so I think the curiosity is a relinquishing of this idea that you have any control over most things in life.
Yeah.
And then starting to explore something that's not just the tunnel vision of the one school of thought that you've had, that's been rooted to the years of the stories and the trauma that you've experienced to this point.
Yeah. 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 I want to know what tangible things you did through this time to help you. So obviously meeting your now husband was a massive turning
Yeah.
point for you, right? He was a beautiful positive influence on you at that time and sort of,
Yeah.
helped a lot of this sort of get the ball rolling. But what other things did you do? Were you in therapy? Did you work with other professionals? Were you like journaling? What sort of tangible things did you find really helped you?
Yeah, I tried a lot of things. I was in therapy a lot since I was a little kid. People would put me in there because of stuff that had happened with my mom. I never really felt like I found the right fit for me. Knowing now as a therapist that you can actually interview your therapist, find the person that's the right fit for you, whether it's a therapist, a coach, whatever helping professional,
Yeah.
there's sort of this like, well, you get what you get idea. And I didn't quite know at the time that you didn't have to accept that.
Yeah.
So I really felt like a lot of external supports, at least in the professional realm, I was having a hard time with that. What I think was really helpful for me from the eating disorder side in terms of loving my body. So whether somebody struggles with an eating disorder or not, most of us spend time hating our bodies or judging our bodies or being frustrated. It's, got to sleep when we should be productive or whatever that is. I started being really honest with my doctor, and I found a lot of solace in in the trust and the security I had with my doctor, which was a big thing for me. So I think helping professional, but adjacent to what a lot of us think about in terms of maybe getting the support on this side.
Mm-hmm.
And then honestly, it was really the turning point for me was grad school when I took a course. It was like a continuing education course. It wasn't even through my school or my college on shame. And I started learning about shame. And it was the turning point for me with everything. That's now why that's my focus and what I do professionally, and the anchor point of what I do personally in my own growth is, so shame is the fear of not being worthy of connection and belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the underpinning for self-love, is a sense of belonging to ourselves. And again, you come into the world and there's sort of this constant anchor point on external approval, success, accolades, reinforcement, all these things. And so learning about shame and learning about how it's legitimately a fear response in your brain. So when you experience it, it is like a fight, flight, or freeze in the body. You enact these patterns. You do, both of us chameleoned because that was a shame response to be that person as a form of taking care of other people, because we internalize that as being the role that we had. That was your narrative. And so I think learning about shame was probably the key point for me. And then getting really curious about attachments and theory around attachment. So there's a couple books I think are super great that we can put in the show notes. I just recently read a book called All About Love, which was incredibly eye-opening to think about what we learn about love, self-love, but also love from our caregivers, from people in our life, and how that sort of the cultural normalization of dysfunction makes it really difficult for any of us to think loving yourself is a right that we have, because it's been painted as a luxury that we have to earn. And again, that's sort of in this normalized dysfunction and system. And so I think those things really helped. Honestly, I think the other thing that helped was to start to really, I guess, create the possibility that it's hard to say it out loud because none of us want to admit it, but to create the possibility that I was wrong. And I think that was the piece where the curiosity comes into play, was to enter each day trying to think about, how am I engaging in the world based on the trauma that I had and the protection my body's doing, versus assuming that what I'm doing is right and healthy and exactly what I need to do. So I think that was kind of the key points. And now as I see it, it is having, whether it's the therapist, the coach, the friend, the partner, but having somebody, one person that you commit to not performing in front of. I think a therapist or a coach is a little bit easier sometimes because they're not in your day-to-day life. So you can come in, you can be your full self, and then you can put the mask back on. But I think that's the thing I found long-term that's helped me, is to surround myself with people where, and I would say start where the stakes are low. Like ultimately, if a therapist hated me or a coach hated me, like my life isn't going to be turned upside down. It wouldn't feel good, but it's not as high stakes as like revealing your full self to your partner and then feeling rejected. So starting low stakes, but then starting to build that up to say, who's the person I can say the thing I really want to say out loud? Like when I was pregnant with my daughter and admitting to my therapist, I don't know if I want to be a mom. I don't know if I did it because I was supposed to, or if I did it because I want to. And then I could say I could release it.
Yeah.
I'm not a bad person because of that. I'm not going to be a bad mom because of that. Everybody thinks that. Everybody questions it, whether they have kids, they don't have kids. Did I make the right choice, the wrong choice? You just put out there the thought you're having, and then you experience the release that it has and the sort of floating nature. So I know those aren't like, do this one thing each day and it's going to be better, but I think it really was around that piece, that exploring, that learning. And for me, it really was learning what shame was, and then going so deep into understanding how that is rooted to our attachments, our experiences, and giving myself grace to say, of course you felt that way, instead of why do you feel this way about yourself?
Yes. And you know what? I mean, I think what you're describing, it is the path, right? The path is not linear. The path does not have check marks along the way that you can just say, I did this thing every day for a week, and therefore I'm going to be like, that's I mean, like if that just magically appeared, that would be really great and quite helpful for a lot of people, but that's not how it works.
Right.
Right? Like it's
Right.
not linear and it's messy and it does involve a lot of learning and deep diving and vulnerability with yourself, vulnerability, like you said, finding somebody that you can open up to. Like that is the path and the ebbs and flows and the ups and downs, and it's all part of it. And if you didn't have all of that, you wouldn't be where you are today. All of that was
Mm-hmm.
necessary for you to be this person sitting in front of me having this conversation, for you to be this person who can facilitate this work for others. You had to go through all of that, all of the mess,
Yeah.
all of the,
Yeah.
internal chaos, so to speak.
Well, even what you just said, I think I had a coaching client even just before our session, and one of the things we talked about is how we all sort of inherit the timeline and the check boxes,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're socialized male, female, different cultural norms, they're all different, but we're all sort of chasing against the scarcity of time. And I think there's that piece too of like time and success and value and how we are spending our time and what we're doing with our time and what we achieve with our time. And so then it's again this, we want things to be easy, we want things to be quick, but we also expect ourselves to move in this very, very linear path. And so thinking about, I'm 35 and I haven't done this and I haven't done this. And what about this? And what about these things? Well, somebody else is doing that same
Uh-huh.
thing. And then there's, we're all sort of measuring. And so I think the other thing is to recognize the ladder systems that we've been socialized around, the comparison pieces,
Yeah.
and asking yourself what data we have that having a kid makes you happier than not having a kid. Being
Right.
married at 25 makes you happier than being married at 35, or that being married at all is the right choice for everybody. And just
Yeah.
starting to, again, not only question your stories, but question the norms on that checklist that you feel that tethered to and
Mm-hmm.
say, but why? Why does my success feel less deserving because I'm getting it at 35 versus someone getting it at 22?
Yeah.
Why can't I be happy for somebody else who didn't experience certain pain or has moved through their pain and gotten to a completely different point in the way that they're doing things? Why does it feel like someone else's success is a threat to mine,
Yeah.
or that I can only feel secure if there are other people that are less successful? And so I think there's that piece too of letting go of the time scarcity and the success scarcity and sort of
Mm-hmm.
re-anchoring on what would it be like to love your life path exactly as it is and to see
Mm-hmm.
the opportunities in that
Yeah.
versus the pressure you put on yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I see myself in a lot of what you've just said. I am 35 and I've lived my life in a
Mm-hmm.
very different way than the like traditional, the checklist, right? My life does
Yeah.
not look like what I was taught it should look like.
Mm-hmm.
And I have one of my best friends. We've been friends since we were 13. So she's my longest friend. It's like
Wow.
we're in it for life now.
Yeah.
And we not too long ago we were having this conversation because she works corporate, she's in a stable job, she's bought her first place, like she's doing the
Mm-hmm.
and it's because it's really truly what feels right to her. And I have done the
Yeah.
complete opposite, right? Like I've moved around the world, I've tried on a few different careers, I've started my own business, like we've just done things totally differently. And I was expressing some of this to her. And I think as you're
Mm-hmm.
speaking, I think there's definitely a shame piece in there. Right. And she actually said to me,
Mm-hmm.
she's like, but Katie, you don't understand all the things that you wish you had. I wish I had all of what you had. I wish I had the experience. I wish I
Mm-hmm.
had the courage to step outside the box of what I was told I'm supposed to be doing and try something else on.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just fascinating when you start diving into these ingrained belief systems in yourself and opening up and being vulnerable to somebody in your life who is safe. things
Right.
are things are just not what we think they are, right? We create these stories in our heads. They
Yeah.
pretty much, they are never what we think they are when we're willing to look at it and be open about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just put it, I do it even when I do public speaking events now, where sometimes I'll just start. And again, I couldn't do this when I first started my process of sort of shame resilience, but now I'll be giving a speaking event. A lot of them are on Zoom because
Yeah.
of, COVID.
Yeah.
and I'll see a bunch of people's faces. It's clear someone's checking their email or they're doing this. And then my shame brain will immediately go to, because you suck as a presenter,
Yep.
you aren't as good. They shouldn't have hired you. They should have brought in someone else. And I'll just say it now. And I'm not looking for their approval. I'm not looking for their celebration, but I'm starting to normalize that everyone has these thoughts all the time. But
Yeah.
we lose so much energy trying to deflect them, put them away, pretend they're not there, instead of being like, no, I think this stuff all the time. I know on a logic level, I'm an amazing mom. I'm aware of that. And that is not to put anybody else down or to inflate an ego. That is acknowledging the fact that it is a value to me that I show up the way that I do. And I've worked my butt off to live in line with my values.
Yeah.
I also know that at least 2 to 3 times a day, I can make a case that someone should call CPS, that my daughter is going to be irrevocably scarred, that something bad happened that I could have prevented. Like, my brain knows how to create stories out of nothing, because in the past I've given it the possibility to run with that, because
Yeah.
I've again assumed I'm the central point of the problem.
Yeah.
And so I think if we can get back to that point of realizing we are living in a world of abundance and opportunity and choice. None of us are going to get to do it all. We're just trying to do the next best right thing for us.
Yeah.
And that means being okay that we can't do everything, but learning to love what is in front of us and being able to be, going back to what you said, be curious about, as you go through it, does this line up for me? How does this fit with my values? Am I performing or am I living? And I think the more we do that, we're going to veer off course at different times. We're going to have a hard time with it at different points. We're going to wish we had the courage to be the other person at different points. But you start to, I think, find that sense of loving yourself now. And I think for me, the biggest thing I work on with people and myself is an integrated love. So loving who I was, who I am, and who I'm going to be, and
Yeah.
not berating myself for what I did or didn't do, obsessing about what I'm not right now, and chasing a future that then, only then am I allowed to love myself. But instead saying, gosh, all three of the Kyras deserve to be loved. The Kyra that showed up when I was 10, the Kyra that showed up when I was 22, the Kyra that showed up last week. I get to love her because she's showing up doing the best she can in any given moment too. And I might have learned something from that, and I might want to continue to evolve, but I get to love her in this storyline that I'm in. Otherwise, I'm going to lose myself hating her for what she's not. And again, fixating on trying to control a story that I can't control to begin with.
Yes. One question that I really like to ask everybody is, does this journey that you've been on, the story that you've told us to this point, is this self-love? Does that feel true for you? Is it self-discovery? Like, if you had to pick like a term, is there one that feels most true to you?
Mm. Going back to that book I mentioned, the All About Love book, one of the things that's talked about in there is sort of love with condition and love as an unconditional sort of concept. So I've been sitting with this a lot over the last few months. I also think we kind of went down this radical self-love rabbit hole, and like anything like wellness, meditation, mindfulness, we sort of lose touch with what it really is. And so what I think about when I think about love, love is an emotion. It is a choice. It shows up in other things too, but I think it's the embodiment of all those other words you said. And when I think about self-love now, I think about loving without expectation,
Yeah.
rather than loving with the condition. And I think what I did for a long time was I loved myself under the condition that I performed a certain way. I loved myself, or I could love myself if I met the conditions of having a certain body size, a certain status, a certain whatever. And now I think it's self-love is this idea of, I love myself, again, going back to that integrated piece, for
Yeah.
who I was, who I am, who I will be. And I think discovery is then a part of that. It's not saying, well, now I love myself now and I have to maintain this, or I love myself if and when I become this person. It's saying that love is something I get to give myself in the process of discovery, in the process of, acceptance, in the process of reflection, and all the other self words that we could put by it. And those things might ebb and flow, but at the core, it's saying, when I lay down each night, can I love myself exactly as I am, regardless of what I did or didn't do on my to-do list, how much reflection I had, whether I acted from shame or I did act from curiosity. Can I still show up and say, I am deserving of love given all of these things? And then eventually I am deserving of love, period, without even thinking about those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. 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 That's gorgeous. I love that. And I think, yeah, the integration and the embodiment and it's not a singular thing. It's not a singular time. It is a
Right.
whole, it is a whole, and it's past and present and future. And again, it's messy, right? It's not just a simple thing that we can like,
Mm-hmm.
and now I have self-love and I will just hold it and it is this thing. No,
Right.
no. And
Right.
some of us would
Right.
like that, right? It would make the process simple, but that's not how it works. And if it did,
Right.
then we would lose the magic of the learning and the growth and the discovery and the acceptance and all of those things, right? That's where the beauty lies, is going
Mm-hmm.
through all of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Kyira, how has this journey to self-love impacted your journey to entrepreneurship, to doing the work that you do today? And also please tell us about the work that you do today, what that actually looks like.
So as I mentioned, I'm a licensed mental health therapist. My training is in anxiety, eating disorders, and trauma, but really, again, it all kind of centers back on work around shame.
Yeah.
And again, working through with people around the stories we tell ourselves. I think the biggest thing that I found is after I gave myself permission to leave the med school sort of chase, and I'm going to be a doctor, and I sat with, what do I want? Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up in the world? One of the things that was really important to me was kind of to leverage what we talked about, like the chameleon thing, the skills. It is a skill when you use it correctly, when you use
Yeah.
it in a way that you don't lose yourself in the process. And what I liked about therapy, and I'm very focused on, I do a lot of supervision, I do a lot of processing, a lot of talking with other therapists, a lot of other coaches to make sure that I find that balance. But I think for me, it was, I want to be able to use that skill to support people because I'm good at it, and then learn how to give myself permission to take the hat off and then not be the person doing that all the time when I'm not at work. I'm not always great at that. Like I'll be the person that we leave a party and Jordan's like, oh, I had a great time. We, played games, did this. I'm like, great. I know whose relationship is falling apart. I know who's doing this. I know who's like, I leave with such a different experience of the story overall. And so I think just wanting to be a person that could listen with my whole heart and to give people the space to understand how they can make the changes internally. Now, COVID, I think, has been an interesting thing for all of us. I am no longer in the therapy room in the same way. I've really kind of revamped and I focused on how do I build community and do work for people that's more sustainable and long term.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of joke that my goal is to put myself out of business. I'd love it if there wasn't waiting lists of 100 plus people for therapy places. If you didn't feel like you had to pay an arm and a leg to access good coaching. I wish that things were available to us, all these things were made more accessible, that insurance would cover it. Again, that's a whole nother episode, but
Yeah.
I now have sort of reframed on building programs and communities. So I do things like therapeutic book clubs, bring people together. Let's go through a book. Let's talk about it. Let's think about what we're going to take from it and how the book doesn't just collect dust or become the kind of temporary push that then we lose. I just launched a program called That Life AR, which is basically everything I do in the therapy room, but in a self-paced course.
Huh.
So that people, I think one of the things, and I don't know if you struggle with this too sometimes when you're working with people, but the more you start to do the work, the more your shame tries to push against doing the work. So we can lose our clients in the crisis of the week. We can lose our clients in the fear of making the change. We can lose them in, a lot of these things. And so I wanted to create something that didn't allow the same possibility for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think pretty much everything I'm doing professionally now is, I love therapy and coaching. It's an incredible space. And again, there's different roles for coaches and therapists, but I think both are so vital and important to the change making process. I also know that the change we can enact is going to require community building. And so I'm trying to redo things in the corporate sector come in and actually do programs where people talk about the shame that's driving the deadlines, that's driving the lack of boundaries, holding everyone accountable to changing cultures and systems, building community through these groups. And I think what it's done for me is it forces me to keep doing the work to address how shame shows up for me too.
Yeah.
And my step of learning I'm in now is kind of, again, I'm not supposed to be the answer. I'm not supposed to be the fixer. I'm supposed to be the person that gives space for them to do the work and to provide skills and support and resources. But if we go back to the self-love piece, it's about empowering them to know that they have the tools, the resources, the supports inside of them,
Yeah.
and or that they have the right to claim them and access them in the ways that they want. They don't need my permission or my fixing. So that's, I think, a lot of now my goal and my work, and really figuring out how does help show up in a way that feels meaningful and sustainable to me,
Mm-hmm.
but still is centered on how I see change really being enacted for people in their lives long term.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And yeah, I'm gonna have the link to your program to all your socials and stuff in the show notes. So if anybody wants to like find out about working with you, because it sounds amazing, and also that book club, I'm totally gonna check it out. Like I feel like it's like, I think you're right. It's like there's so many things available to us, but community is part of the core. Community is something that we all
Mm-hmm.
need, and community that can educate us and empower us and lift us up is, that's powerful. That's huge. That is
Yeah.
huge. Yeah. Um, Kyira, if somebody's listening and they're maybe where you used to be, maybe they're really deep in shame, but they have a certain level of awareness, obviously, if they're listening to this, right? There's maybe like a certain level of awareness of like, this is something that I want to change, or I want to start taking steps, but I don't know where to start. Is there one thing that you would recommend, one exercise, one practice, one step that you would recommend for people as a beginning?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I try to balance with people, because we're so action driven as a culture and community, again, globally, but obviously I'm in Portland, Oregon, so the US,
Yeah.
is we have such a pressure of fix, do something now. And that creates what I call, well, I don't call this, but what I refer to as avoidant goal setting. So I just want to be anywhere but here. Now I know this is a problem. I don't like this, whatever the case may be. And I think what we need to do before we jump into how do I move forward is to get clear on what's the actual problem for
Mm.
us. So it's easy to go at the surface. It's easy to say, well, I don't like this. My relationship is this. I feel like I'm lonely all the time. But I think the question to ask yourself is, why is this a problem for you? What is this centered on? How do you make sense of the story that you're existing in? What are again, going back to shame, what are the stories you came into these relationships with? How are you co-creating these dynamics? And not as a way to shame yourself, but just a ton of curiosity. And so my ask for people whenever they're thinking about things is to say, we need to get clear on what the problem is before we talk about addressing it, because the problem can't just be I need to love myself more. Great, but what does that mean? What does that look like? Where are
Yeah.
you not loving yourself? Where are you feeling like you can't get it? How does it show up in all your roles? How is it showing up in your relationships, your thoughts? Really get clear on it.
Yeah.
And I think that process takes a lot longer than feels comfortable, because it means turning inward and looking at the stuff we spent most of our lives running from.
Yes.
But that would be where I would say we have to start. We have to give enough space to build the insight into what's going on and why, really specifically, why it's a problem for us, so that we can know what we want to do moving forward. So then instead of those avoidant anywhere but here goals where we just land in the next thing that sucks, the next unfulfilling relationship, the next job that we don't feel good in, we
Mm-hmm.
create approach goals to say, this is who I am, who I want to be, where I want to go. And now I'm going to create the path to get there with flexibility and grace and openness. But I can be in alignment with that person instead of just running from the panic or the pain that's in front of me now.
That's powerful. That's powerful. Incredible. I love that. I love that. So, Kyira, as I can't, I don't know how time has gone this fast. Like, I'm literally looking at the clock and being like, how have we been talking for this long? Like, and I have so many more questions that I want to ask you. And there's so many more like bits and pieces about both yourself and your story and your process and your work that I really want to know about. but I feel like for the purposes of today and this container,
Yes. Yeah.
we can't go down all the tangents, right? But I'm just curious for you, is there anything else on your heart that you feel called to share today? Any last bits of wisdom, advice, insight, any final words that you want to leave us with as we wrap up today?
I think the only thing is, so the term I've kind of come to try to live my life by is to have compassionate and kind of love for myself is flexible grace in a relentless pursuit. And so I think for people to, some people are going to listen to this and they're going to start identifying that they have shame, but then they're going to think, well, she did that, but she's got these things. And I don't have somebody around me, or I've tried this and I can't get there. And we're going to immediately, shame's going to show up and try to talk you out of somebody being worthy of doing that. Or they're going to say, well, she talked about trauma and she talked about these things. My life wasn't that bad, so I should just be fine. I should figure it out. And so again, we're going to fall into those traps.
Yeah.
I think just listening to this and hopefully taking from this the notion that, so shame is an emotion. It's something that all of us feel, we all experience, regardless of what your story is, what you've experienced. You deserve to claim the shame experiences that you've had and the stories that you've told yourself that have created that sense of perpetual suffering, and giving yourself space to say you are allowed that, you have that, and that's okay, so that you can then decide how you want to move forward. Because I think a lot of times we do these episodes, it really draws people in, and then if you're like me, you'll leave them and your shame's already talked you out of or talked you into something so deep that it's hard to even go anywhere with the information you heard.
Yeah. 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 Amazing. Amazing. Thank you for that. And I think we are going to leave it there. I think that's a beautiful spot to wrap it up. It's like the cherry on top. So thank you. Thank you for coming on and sharing your personal story. Thank you for sharing your professional story and wisdom that you have. I feel like there's so much in our conversation today that is going to be, I mean, I know for me, it was helpful for me, right? Like I love doing these interviews because it's so beneficial for me, but I just know that it's going to be helpful for others as well. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.